Our research project for COM 410 is on the lack of racial diversity in The Bachelor. The Bachelor is an American dating and relationship reality television series that debuted on March 25, 2002 on ABC. The show is hosted by Chris Harrison. The show's success has resulted in several spin-offs, including The Bachelorette, The Bachelor Pad, Bachelor in Paradise After Paradise, and The Bachelor Winter Games. Though the show has gained success, it is highly uninclusive. According to Meredith Blake, a writer at the Los Angeles Times, she quotes, "A disproportionate number of contestants have been white, while Black, Latino, and Asian competitors are predictably eliminated in early episodes. A few seasons failed to include any non-white cast members. As of 2014, minorities constituted nearly 40% of the American population."
Which leads us to our research question. Is there a lack of racial diversity within reality television, and if so, why do viewers support them? We are choosing to particularly talk about The Bachelor due to our knowledge of its current lack of inclusion. The purpose of this study was to understand and describe the audience's perspective on racial diversity. We focused mostly on the diversity of men and women that were cast in the show, how the audience perceives this diversity or lack thereof. We tested to see if our audience realized the lack of racial acceptance in reality television.
Based on our secondary research we analyzed, we found a tremendous amount of information to back our argument on the lack of diversity that the show portrays. The show has many critiques, but the biggest is that it is made up of mostly white contestants. This quote proves our argument about inclusivity. Other ethnic groups find The Bachelor unrelatable because of the lack of diversity. Based on our research studies and communicating with various audience members, we have found that the majority of the people who watch The Bachelor are white. Women of color do not have the same opportunities within romance. Without having the opportunity to get far in the show, ethnic women are being excluded of the opportunities of romance that the show offers. As the researchers, our major role was to bring awareness to the lack of diversity within this highly acknowledged show. Some of the other roles that we took on was to remain unbiased in the focus groups, encourage conversations, and remain respectful to our participants' opinions.
Data collection procedures that we used were surveys, focus groups, and participant observation. In surveys, we found information that examined social trends and patterns that the Bachelor audience possessed. With focus groups, were used to get a more complex and extensive view on the makeup of racial diversity by listening to avid viewers of the show. And with participant observation, they were used to analyze the thoughts of groups of viewers as they watched the show. Data analysis procedures were performed by conducting surveys in which we found audience members deal with racial diversity within their lives and the effects of racial diversity within the shows they watch. Surveys were done on their own time and anonymously, making it more truthful. Focus groups found participants agreed that there was a lack of racial diversity within the group and that there was a follow the path mentality. In our participant observation, we found that until the lack of racial diversity was directly noted, it was ignored for personal pleasure while watching the show. People were more comfortable talking because they knew that other participants.
With that being said, we anticipated ethical issues that we faced with discussing such a sensitive topic. Firstly being problems of racial inclusion and representation within our participants. The predominant number of respondents were white, which took away from the variety of groups we previously anticipated. Secondly, the male to female ratio of our participants. Although we did attempt to include male voices as much as we could, we found that the males in particular were not as willing to admit that they were viewers of the show. Lastly, we wanted to maintain objectivity and unbiased responses from both us and our participants. From having a predetermined notion of the show, we've asked questions in such a way that we wouldn't sway our research data. We have found particularly interesting data from the following questions. Do you notice when there is a lack of diversity on a show? We found it interesting that based off the responses from this question, the majority of our participants were aware of the lack of diversity that does exist on the show.
Which brings us to the next question. Are you more likely to support a show with racial diversity? Almost 53% did not feel that race impacted their viewership of reality television, yet they were all still aware of the lack of diversity. Another interesting point that our survey brought to light for us came from the question, have you ever been in an interracial relationship? Despite our findings, more than half of our audience have been in an interracial relationship themselves.
Some questions that we brought up in our focus groups sparked very interesting responses from our participants. One question being, what are your feelings about The Bachelor? The participants hated the show and thought it was a stupid concept. One of our male respondents said, it's like a train wreck. You don't want to stare, but you can't look away. Second question being, do you feel television is a racial enabler? One response that truly represents our findings is found through our focus group participant who stated, I guess I never really noticed the topic of race very much until I started kind of noticing it on TV. The third question, do you feel like the producers already have a certain favorite picked out and they manipulate the situation? All participants said yes to this question. One in particular stated, I feel like they're doing it out of obligation. Instead of complaining, the participants offered solutions to this existing dilemma.
Some of these solutions that were offered also came up through our participant observation. Through the commentary made by the group participants, it is easy to recognize that the current show already proves that segregation exists by promoting whiteness early on. Within the question, if the cast were entirely white, would it still be as enjoyable? Participant A stated, although he can appreciate beautiful women, it's not always something he can relate to. Both participants then agreed that without the variety of culturally and ethnically different women who resembled themselves, the show would definitely be lacking. The second question, does it bother the audience that there is a lack of diversity within the show, resulted in participant B saying, I'm not sure, but there's definitely something missing and it's pretty obvious. This further provides backing to our original statement. The final question, are people of different ethnicities utilized to move the plot along, was answered enthusiastically by both participants with a surefire yes, showing that the intent of the producers to cast different ethnicities is not for them to win a show, but instead there is a preset notion.
During our research, we faced some limitations. Issue finding enough individuals to participate, problems of not asking thorough enough questions in our survey and focus groups, which led to a few misinterpretations, lost certain data pertaining to our research, and lack of a budget to provide incentives for our participants. However, we found solutions to these limitations for future reference, which are planning focus groups and participant observations further in advance to allow for people to have time to set aside and provide incentives to draw out a more diverse group of participants. As a conclusion to our original research statement, yes, we found this through our secondary and primary research that there is a lack of diversity. However, it does not typically affect viewership.
Here are some of the references that we used throughout the video.
Thank you for watching.